So good morning, and for those of you who are joining us in our evening groups, good evening to you. And for those of you, I know a lot of groups meeting all over the place. For those guys in Gonzales that are joining us, hello to you as well. Last week we started off with a little bit of Dave Barry talking about the difference between men and guys. And let me continue that a little bit when it comes to communicating feelings or communication in general. Guys have a tendency to struggle with this. So kind of evaluate this conversation and see if you've ever found yourself in one like this before. So this aspect of guyhood, communication, is very frustrating to women. So a guy will be reading the newspaper and the phone will ring and he'll answer it, listen for 10 minutes, hang up, and resume reading. Finally, his wife will say, "Who was that?" And he'll say, "Phil Wonkerman's mom." Now, Phil is an old friend they haven't heard from in 17 years. The wife will say, "Well?" And the guy will say, "Well, what?" And the wife will say, "What did she say?" And the guy will say, "She said Phil is fine," making it clear by the tone of his voice that although he does not wish to be rude, he's trying to read the newspaper, and he happens to be right in the middle of an important panel of Calvin and Hobbes. But the wife, ignoring this, will say, "That's all she said?" And she will not let up. She will continue to ask district attorney-style questions, forcing the guy to recount the conversation until she is satisfied that she has the entire story, which is that Phil just got out of prison after serving a sentence for a murder he committed when he became a drug addict because of the guilt he felt when his wife died in a freak submarine accident while Phil was having an affair with a nun. But now he's all straightened out and has a good job as a trapeze artist and is almost through the surgical part of a sex change and recently became happily engaged to marry a prominent member of the Grateful Dead. So in other words, he is fine, which is exactly what the guy told her in the first place. But is that enough? No. She wants to hear every single detail. I don't know about you, but that's happened to me before, and I just don't understand it. So last week we began to put together the methodology for which we would build our definition of manhood, and today we're going to put that definition together and give it to you and have you begin the process of memorizing it and incorporating it into your life. And remember our methodology last week is we looked at the two Adams. The first Adam from the Garden of Eden, the first man, and the second Adam, Jesus Christ. And as we looked at the two of them, we said these are the two members of two different masculine identities. So if you look at the response and behavior of Adam, it leads you in a masculine destiny, which is the destiny of death and destruction, not only for himself, but for his family and the people around him. That manhood that is set on an earthly course is typically the model of masculinity that's embraced by a declining and failing culture. Okay? The second Adam, Jesus Christ, is a manhood set on a heavenly course. He is a life-giving being. And when you follow the masculine example of Jesus Christ, that's a masculine destiny that leads to life and rewards, not only for himself, but also for all of those around him. And so when we kind of push these two examples together in Scripture, what pops out are four very clear characteristics of what it means to be a real man, masculine destiny. So that's what we want to look at today. Is the four defining differences between Adam and Christ, which will give us our masculine destiny. So the first one, letter A on your outline, is the first Adam fell into passivity. The second Adam rejected passivity. The first Adam fell into passivity. The second Adam rejected passivity. Now, we've talked about the story of Adam and Eve in the garden, and when Eve was tempted, Adam was with her. Now, Adam was not actively, aggressively out disobeying God. He was simply passive. And when the serpent was tempting his wife, and when his wife became confused, when she became deceived, Adam was clearly aware that what she was about to do was not the will of God, and yet he stood by passively, watching what happened, which plunged the whole human race into destruction. In contrast to that, we see more masculinity in the manger than we see in the Garden of Eden with Adam. In the manger, we have Jesus who is coming to save the human race. And Paul in Philippians says he's actually laying aside his heavenly glory. He's laying aside his heavenly comfort, and he's parachuting into a world that's struggling, that's hurting, that's broken, for the purpose of saving the world. He's not passive. He's moving out to make a difference, to do something different. Watching Jesus in another garden. So if you take the Garden of Eden, where Adam was, and you take the Garden of Gethsemane, where Jesus is facing the cross, remember what happens in the Garden of Gethsemane? Jesus comes to his disciples and says, I'm in anguish. I'm facing the cross. I've got this pain I'm going to suffer for the human race. Would you guys do me a favor? Would you do me a favor? Would you just sit here and pray for me? Like, how often does Jesus ask his disciples to do him a favor? Like, typically he's not asking them to do him a favor. He's the one that's doing them a favor. So in this moment of greatest need, he comes to them and asks them to do him a favor. And what do? They go passive. They're tired. It's been a long day. They fall asleep. 3 times he comes back and wakes them up and asks them to pray. And what do? They go passive. They're not against him. They're just giving in to their feelings, their fatigue, just being passive, while Jesus Christ is praying and seeking the Father as he saves the world. And so, the first Adam fell into passivity. The second Adam rejects passivity. So that's one of our definitions. A real man rejects passivity. Second, the first Adam disregarded his responsibilities, and the second Adam accepts responsibilities. The first Adam disregarded his responsibilities. The second Adam, Jesus, actually takes on or accepts the responsibilities that were given to him. Now, you may ask the question, what were the responsibilities given to Adam? What was he responsible to do that he did not accept? It's the same responsibilities that we have today as men, that we have to make a decision of whether we will accept them or not. And on your outline there's 3 responsibilities that every man has to take on or own. The first one is a will to obey. Adam had a will to obey. The second one is a work to do. Adam was given a task or a job, work to do. And third is for a woman to love. Adam is given a woman to love, and he has to make a decision as to whether he's going to do that or not. Now let's take all 3 of these. Let's look really quickly at the contrast. For a will to obey, the question we always have to wrestle with is whose will? Am I going to obey my will? That is, I'm going to operate based on what I feel, what I think, my guts, my approach, my strategies, my intellect. Do I operate in my will, or do I operate under revealed will? Am I willing to look at the will of God and ask him the bigger question, what is it that you have given me? What am I supposed to be about? And what we see with Adam is Adam gave into his own will. God had clearly given him a direction, and Adam chose not to go that way. And because of that, because of his selfishness, then he plunged himself, his wife, and his family into sin. In Jesus' case, he's in the Garden of Gethsemane, and he's facing the most unimaginable experience like, how could anybody ever be good with what he's got coming to him? And in the midst of that, he says to the Father, I don't want to do this. This is not my preference. Suffering and dying for humanity, going to the cross, becoming sin, being separated from you, Father, that's not what I want. But not my will, your will be done. And by accepting responsibility for the Father's will, he changed the course of human history. 2.2 billion people on the planet now looked at Jesus Christ as their Savior, their shepherd, their guide, their example, and their hope. So, a will to obey. Second, for a work to do. God puts Adam in the garden, and he has responsibilities to cultivate it, to keep it, to care for it, and everything in the garden is available to him. He can eat the produce and enjoy the produce. He's got one restriction in the garden, and so he's got a work to do. Adam is also given the responsibility to raise offspring, to perpetuate the human race, to represent God on the planet. That's his work. That's what he's been given to do. And he chooses to experiment with the goodness of God and try for a better lot in life by disobeying God, following the serpent, and eating of the tree. In contrast to that, Jesus comes and he's got a work to do too, which is to save the world. And it's going to cost him everything. And yet he leans into that and he does it. And all men, we've got a role to play, a job to do, work that we're supposed to do on the planet. Not just a job, but a leadership role to change the culture, to lead our families, to work in the world. And the question is, do we accept that? Or do we say, no, really, my work is me. It's me. It's what I want. My feelings, my desires, how I look, how people treat me. That's my world. That's what I'm all about. Third is for a woman to love. For a woman to love. In Adam's case, he was given Eve. And rather than accepting the responsibility to protect her, even if she didn't want him to, and to lead her, even if she didn't want him to, he chose not to love her that way. In fact, maybe one of the most unloving moments in history is when he watched her commit spiritual suicide and used her to see if, is God going to kill us right now? Or is there something the serpent's telling us that, he let that happen? In contrast to that, Jesus has a woman to love too. In Ephesians chapter 5, the bride of Christ is the church. In other words, we are the bride of Christ. We're part of the family of God, and Jesus gave his life for his church. And so the first Adam disregarded his responsibilities. The second Adam accepted or accepts responsibility. So rejects passivity, accepts responsibility. Here's one of the things that is kind of fascinating when you stop and think about it. When it comes to men can run a company, men can raise an army, men can build a dam. Men can govern a nation. Men can invent a microchip. If men can do that, then why is it so hard for a man to lead his family, to establish a family budget that has a proactive view of the future, to romance his wife, and to keep doing that through the whole course of their marriage? Why is it so hard to teach a son and invest time in building character in a son? Why is it so hard to establish a division of labor within the home, to create harmony by sitting down and working through that with your wife and kids? How will we run this family? What are our priorities? How do we operate as a team? You can go to work and you can put together an org chart and develop clear lines of how the whole thing is supposed to run at work, but you can't do that at home. Why is that? Why is it that men have such a difficult time walking with God? Doesn't make sense, does it? Because when it comes to domestic responsibilities, men have a tendency to become passive and not accept those responsibilities. Okay? Third is the first Adam abandoned his post of leadership. The second Adam chose to lead courageously. The first Adam abandoned his post of leadership. The second Adam chose to lead courageously. When Adam eats of the tree, he is hiding in the garden. And when God calls to Adam, Adam expresses, well, because I was afraid, so I hid myself. This is not courageous leadership. It's exactly the opposite of that. He didn't have the courage to face his wife and speak truth into her, and now he doesn't have the courage to face his God, his maker, and speak truth to him, and he's blaming and pointing fingers rather than leading courageously. Now I want you to write this down in big, bold letters on your page. And I never want you to apologize for this. Men were created to lead. Put a couple punctuation marks, exclamation marks at the end, and underline that sentence. Men were created to lead. And when men lead effectively for the right cause, society prospers. Women and children thrive. Watched a really interesting conversation that took place recently between a Danish journalist and an American journalist over the crisis that's taking place in Germany right now with the refugees that are coming in. And so, because the refugees have really different understanding of how women are treated in the West and how women are treated in different parts of the world, there's been several incidences, particularly in Germany, of some kind of abuse or some kind of mistreatment of women through this taking place. So the men in Cologne decided to respond to this in a really powerful way to show their solidarity with the women. So they all dressed in miniskirts and walked through the city saying, listen, this is not right. Women can dress however they want to, and they shouldn't be abused. And the Danish female commentator said, that's our problem. Men are too feminine. Like, what kind of a masculine response is that? Like, our men ought to be out in the streets protecting their women, not putting on a miniskirt and marching through the streets. And the American commentator was just like, she was like, whoa, like, are you suggesting that men ought to stand up and take a stand? And like say, this can't happen here? We're not going to let this happen? And she says, yeah. That's exactly what needs to happen. Like, our government leaders need to put their foot down and say, here are the values that we have here, and if you come here, we're going to work with you to develop those values. We don't do this. Here's a woman calling out the leadership of Europe, saying that the men have adopted a feminized approach to dealing with problems. Now, this is a woman saying that. And I think we're going to see this worldwide. At some point in time, people are going to wake up and go, we need men. And constantly in our culture, I don't know if you feel this from time to time, but I'm constantly feeling like there's this cry going out, where are the men? You walk through the mall and you see a 12-year-old girl who's dressed, well, she's dressed like all the pictures that she sees in the mall. And she's dressed inappropriately, and she's standing there, and she's got 2 or 3 13, 14-year-old boys that are kind of bumping into her, and they're giggling, and they're touchy-feely, and she's giggling, and you kind of ask yourself the question, where is her father? Like, where is her father? Because what she's learning is that I can get masculine attention by simply kind of letting the boys touch me and giggle and fondle and like wear these clothes. And you think, where's the man? Where's the dad? Where's the father of those boys? And you scratch your head. You look at the abuse that takes place in our government on Wall Street, and you kind of go, like, where are the men? Like, where are the men to stand up and say, no, that's not right? Or in Washington, that's not right. We're not going to do that. Where are those guys? It's just something constantly. And with Jesus, you see a leader. Every situation he walks into, no matter how difficult it is, the people around him find a direction, a path, someone to follow. And so, men, we're called to lead courageously in 3 areas. Called to lead courageously in 3 areas. When we look at Jesus, he gave direction to those around him. He gave direction to those around him, to the people around Jesus. There was a sense, there's a place, there's a path, there's direction, there's right, there's wrong, there's a good way, there's a noble way. He gave direction. And you might want to add this phrase. He gave direction to them with his life. Jesus said to people, follow me. He didn't say to people, you go do that while I sit here and pontificate about the way the world ought to be. I mean, how many of us do that? Like we complain about the national debt growing, but our personal debt is growing and we don't have a handle on that. And we're not taking care of business there, but we point over there. You know, we complain about the morals of our culture, but we're not speaking into our families and coaching them on good morals, or leading in that way, or turning off or not attending things that we have moral objections to. And so it's one thing to pontificate, it's another thing to say, follow me. And Jesus said, follow me. Now, some of you may be saying, like, I just don't feel like I'm that strong of a leader. We are not talking about the gift of leadership. We're talking about the responsibility to take care of business, to own your deal. Some of you would also feel, I'm not that strong when it comes to managing money. But guess what? If you take out a home loan, you're expected to figure out how to pay that thing off, right? And we figure that out even if we're not very good at money. And so you may not feel like that you have this strong visionary leadership instinct. That's not what we're talking about here. What we're talking about is taking responsibility to ensure that you understand what you've committed yourself to and what does it take to lead out in those areas, and then just do that. So, direction with his life. Second, he gave protection to those around him. Jesus provided protection to those around him, and he did it with his life. In John 10:11, Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. In the garden, when the soldiers come to get Jesus and Peter pulls out his sword and cuts off the high priest's ear, Jesus steps in and protects Peter by healing the guy. Like, he steps in. And then ultimately he's going to step in at the cross and suffer with his life to pay for the sins of humanity. So what we're talking about here is, what do I need to do to protect the people in my world? What personal sacrifices, time, investment, what are my goals and priorities am I going to lay aside because I'm going to provide protection for those around me? Third, he made provision for those around him. Jesus provided for the people in his life. He made provision with his life. He fed them with food. Feeding of the 5,000, he fed them with his word. He taught them the truth. He fed them in every way and provided for them. So I'm going to jump to Ephesians chapter. I want you to see these 3 in Ephesians chapter 5 in the husband-wife relationship. We'll start talking more about that next week. But in Ephesians chapter 5, if you want to turn there, you're welcome to do that. Starting in verse 23, I just want you to see this. In the husband-wife relationship, in verse 23, Paul says, for the husband is the head of the wife, as Christ is the head of the church. Now, what does the head do? The head has the eyes, the ears, the brain, the intellect. The head provides direction for the body. Direction for the body. So leadership, leading courageously, is charting direction for the family, direction for your life, direction for your business, direction for your church and ministry, direction for our country, providing courageous direction. And in marriage, the husband is the head of the wife as Christ is the church. The husband's responsible not to create the direction, not to create the direction, because the direction has been given by God in Revelation for how we treat people and what's important. In fact, God gave you the woman because she can contribute significantly to help you figure out the direction. But at the end of the day, you're responsible to make sure the family has a direction, that the direction that you have is a noble one, a biblical one, and then you're going to stick to it. Courageously lead. So, when you're driving in the car and your wife says, "Oh man, it's been a busy day, we're all tired. Why don't we just pull in here and eat at this restaurant?" And you're thinking to yourself, why is she suggesting this? Because we sat down and we worked out our budget? And this is not in it. And you think to yourself, well, okay. Well, if everybody wants to do that, I don't want to be the bad guy here. Coward. Coward. Right? I'm talking to me. Coward. Leads courageously. Okay, we put together a plan. And so who's the one who says, "Hey, honey, guess what? If everybody's too tired, I'll make dinner. I'll do it." Because we've committed, right? We've committed to a decision here, and this is what we believe is good, so we're going to follow that. We're going to move forward with that. Moving on to verse 25, he says, "Husbands, love your wives as Christ loved the church and gave himself up for her to make her holy, cleansing her by the washing with water through the word, and to present her to himself as a radiant church without stain or wrinkle or any other blemish, but holy and blameless. In the same way, husbands ought to love their wives as their own bodies. He who loves his wife loves himself." Now watch. "After all, no one ever hated his own body, but what does he do? He feeds and cares for it, just as Christ does the church." The word feed there. We provide for ourselves, provision. So we're supposed to provide for our wives. Direction, provision. The word care there is the word that means to protect, to watch over, to keep safe. So these three characteristics of leading courageously, he gave direction, he gave protection, he gave provision, are the same three that in Ephesians 5, Paul tells the man, this is what Jesus did for his bride, the church. This is his masculinity, and you as a man, you are supposed to do that as well. Leading courageously, giving direction, protection, and provision. That's what we're called to do. Now, before we look at the fourth one, let me just say this. The greatest obstacle to us accomplishing a masculine vision is our feelings. That's the greatest obstacle. The greatest obstacle to accomplishing a masculine vision is not the bad parenting that you got or the lack of blessing that you got from your father. It's not the woman that you're trying to lead or the rebellious kids that have come along or the difficulty in your government or your church or your world. It's not that. It's actually what's inside of you. That's the biggest obstacle. When we are feelings driven, our leadership will revolve around a personal agenda. When we are truth driven, our agenda or our direction will revolve around our transcendent cause. And so the thing that holds us back, our feelings, some of those are physical in nature. Like, I'm too tired. This is too hard. Like, I think about you guys are getting up at 6 o'clock in the morning. And I'm sure that there are many other people who would benefit greatly from this discussion who have said, oh yeah, that's so early. I just can't get up that early. And so I'm not going to try. I'm not going to get out there. It could be emotional. You know, the word that's used in the younger generation now is awkward. Like to look a man in the eye and shake his hand. Well, who does that anymore? I feel awkward, weird. I'm not going to do that. Can't do that. Not everybody else isn't doing it. How we feel emotionally. How we're perceived by people. I mean, the number of people that shoot themselves in the foot because somebody didn't give them the respect that they deserve. I mean, I worked with a guy one time. He said, you know, I got fired again. I said, what's the deal this time? He said, well, I threw a chair through a window at work. And then I said, yeah, any reason why you did that? Oh, yeah. And then listed, like for the next 20 minutes, all of these abuses that he perceived that people had done to him. So, like, this is 4 jobs now where everybody treats you badly. I mean, what's he operating on? It's completely his feelings. This is how, like, if I don't get treated a certain way, I can't function. I can't move forward. And the challenge is the ability to master your feelings, to set those aside for truth, what you believe is best, what you believe is right, will be the greatest struggle of your life. That's why Jesus, before he starts his earthly ministry, now think about this, Jesus is 30 years old, time to start. He's been baptized by John. The Father has given him his blessing. Remember, this is my Son, the one I love. Look at him. In him I am well pleased. The Holy Spirit descends on him. He's ready to go. And what's the first thing that happens? Matthew chapter 4, it says, the Spirit of God led Jesus out in the wilderness to be tempted by the devil. Before he's going to be able to do his masculine vision, he has to face his feelings. And what are the 3 temptations? The first one's physical. 40 days of fasting, turn these stones into bread. I'm starving. He had to overcome his physical feelings. Then he had to overcome the feelings of power. And so the devil takes him up to the temple and says, throw yourself off and force God's angels to have to come down and catch you just so you can prove to yourself that you have the power, that you have the respect of heaven, that you are really somebody. He had to overcome that. Temptations for power, for respect. Then the last one, the devil takes him up, shows him all the kingdoms of the world and says, listen, I'm in charge of all this right now. I'll give this all to you if you'll bow down and worship me. In other words, the temptation to sell out so that you can have it all. You can have it all. What am I willing to compromise so I can have it all? Those feelings of how, wouldn't it be so awesome if I was on top of the heap? If I was sitting in the boardroom? If I was the one that everybody was looking up to? If I was the best athlete or the best this or the best that? And everybody was applauding for me and I felt so good about myself? And Jesus has to overcome all 3 of those before he's ready to really lead. And that's what it means to be able to get beyond myself to a transcendent cause. I've got to not let what's in myself hold me back. And that takes courage. That's hard to do. I had a really interesting experience that drove this home to me. A number of years ago, I was really convicted that I was taking my wife for granted, and I just, I really wasn't speaking into her, and I really wasn't showing her love, and I really wasn't communicating to her. And so I had got this great plan in my head. I was going to take her out, take her to a really nice place, and if you know me, I'm about as tight as they get, so doing that was really hard to do. Take her to a really nice place and have a really nice meal, and at the meal, I was going to apologize to her and tell her, like, honey, Cindy, you're so wonderful. You're the best wife. I always think this. I don't say it to you, and I feel like I've just been off doing my thing and not really investing in you. So I got my speech all planned. And so we get to the dinner, and we're sitting at the dinner and having this really nice dinner, and the conversation's going nice. And of course, she didn't get to go out too much because as tight as I am, like, I don't do that, didn't do that. And so, we're sitting there, and it's all really nice and pleasant, and she's happy and all this. And in one ear, I hear the Holy Spirit saying, okay, open your mouth and start this conversation. And in the other ear, I'm hearing Satan say, why would you ruin this evening? It's going so well. Because if you talk and open the door, for those of you who've been married for a while, this may be a 3 or 4 hour conversation. She may tell you exactly what she feels. And do you really want to do that? And I just remember, like, I had this visceral, I don't know if you guys have ever had this before, had this visceral feeling of, like, inside of me, my prepared speech would start to rise out of my lungs to come out of my mouth, and it would get to this Adam's apple, like this lump in my throat. And it was almost as if, like, I just couldn't get it out. And I'm having this internal struggle, which seems so irrational, because that's what feelings are. They're so irrational. And I didn't say anything to her. And I got home, and I'll remember this for the rest of my life. I looked in the mirror and verbally said out loud, Tim, you are a coward. You are a coward. You're letting your feelings interfere with your masculine destiny. Your biggest enemy to moving forward, to seize the leadership and take responsibility and to do the noble things, will come down to, can you say no to your feelings to say yes to something that is much, much greater? Which leads us to the last one, and letter D on your outline there. The first Adam sought a great reward, a greater reward. The second Adam expected the greater reward, God's reward. So the first Adam sought a greater reward. The second Adam expected the greater reward, God's reward. Let me explain that. Men don't operate simply because they should. I mean, at the end of the day, we are wired around a cause because we think it's going to make things better. That's who masculine souls are. That's what we do. Adam sins in the Garden of Eden because he's sitting there hearing the possibility that if he eats from the fruit of the tree, that may improve his station in life. He expected to get something positive out of what he was doing, a greater reward. In contrast to that, Jesus expects the greater reward, but his reward, he's looking for it from God himself, God's greater reward. And I think that there's a twofold motivation for a masculine destiny. One is, it will ultimately make life better for you and the people around you. In other words, it will have some impact in the here and now. But on the days when the seeds that you're sowing will not grow and produce fruit for years and years and years, it gets really hard if you don't have an eternal perspective that there's somebody that's looking down from me from heaven, and that someone is going to reward this act that might not bear fruit for a long time. So when I'm investing in my 3-year-old, knowing that, like, this is really, with all the stuff I've got going on, this is a decision I'm making, but it might not pay dividends until he's 33. How do you keep yourself focused and moving forward? When you end up facing a setback in your career or in your finances because you will not travel a dishonest path, ultimately that's going to benefit you in this life, but in the moment it doesn't feel that way. When you hang in there with a woman who's going through a difficult time, maybe the hormones of menopause, And you hang in there and say, I'm not going to let this marriage fall apart. I'm going to fight for this marriage. Ultimately, when you're old and gray and you've weathered the storm, it will benefit you. But in the moment, if there's not a greater reward, somebody that's going to reward your faithfulness, the temptation for men is to say, this isn't worth it, and give up. In Scripture, the Bible clearly teaches, often forgotten thoughts today in the church, the Bible clearly teaches that every Christian will stand before the judgment seat of Christ, and we will give an account for everything we've done in this life. Every thought, every word, every deed. Now, you're not standing there, if you're a believer in Jesus, to be judged on whether you go to hell or not. That's not what the judgment seat of Christ is about. The judgment seat of Christ is the time when Jesus Christ puts an eternal value, or what heaven sees, about the value of what you did with your life. And there's two possibilities. One is it's wood, hay, and straw. It doesn't, has no value. And when tested under the evaluation of God's judgment, it burns up that part of your life. You look at it, you go, wow, that was meaningless. I lived all that time, did all those things, and it just has no value. And you suffer loss. It's disappointing. The other deeds that you do, they're going to be rewarded with something precious that you're going to actually be able to, as a reward, put at the feet of Jesus. Have something to bring him in worship. And so the question is, as a Christian, am I going to stand there empty-handed because of the way I live my life or not? And there are all kinds of verses that speak to this. Let me just quickly go through them. I've got them on your outline there, and I've got them printed here. So I'm just gonna read through some of these and just show you, because it's an overwhelming amount of Scripture that points that way, that the motivation for living the Christian life is the reward of God someday when we stand in his presence. Hebrews 12:1 and 2. Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders. Anything that hinders, and the sin that so easily entangles, and let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us. Let us fix our eyes on Jesus, the author and perfecter of our faith. So we're supposed to follow the example of Jesus, who, for the joy set before him. So he looked into the joy, the reward that's coming from the Father, who for the joy set before him, what did he do? He endured the cross. He experienced the pain, he suffered, he endured the cross, scorned its shame. In other words, he shamed the awkwardness. He made awkward out of the awkwardness. He scorned the shame. He mocked this sense that, like, I'm going to be hanging naked in front of these people and I'll go down in history as the one who died a criminal's death. He scorned it and overcame it and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. In other words, he was looking to the applause of the Father and the value of his work to be able to give him the motivation to get through the hardships, expecting the greater reward. Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 26, talking about Moses. Watch this. By faith, Moses, when he had grown up, refused to be known as the son of Pharaoh's daughter. He chose to be mistreated along with the people of God rather than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a short time. He regarded disgrace for the sake of Christ as of greater value than the treasures of Egypt. Why? It says because he was looking ahead to his reward. So he traded the gold, the girls, and the chariot for sandals in the desert, because there was something out there greater, the reward of God. And because of that, he led the nation of Israel through the desert and into the promised land, accomplished one of the most incredible feats in history, because he was looking ahead, not looking for how do I get mine in the here and now and enjoy what I have. He gave that up for something greater. He endured that and moved forward. 2 Corinthians chapter 2, verse 9. Paul says, however, as it is written, no eye has seen, no ear has heard, no mind has conceived what God has prepared for those who love him. Like what we have in store for us, we have no concept of how amazing God's plan is for the kingdom and the life to come. And we sell out short. Paul, 2 Timothy 4, 6 through 8, he says, "For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure has come." Now, Paul's sitting in jail in Rome waiting to be beheaded. So, he's traded in his academic credentials, his status as one of the leading officials in the Jewish ruling council. He's traded in his financial gain. He's given it all away, lived through the hardships of life. And here's what he says, verse 7. It's good masculine words. He says, "I've fought the good fight. I have finished the race, and I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for his appearing." There are 5 crowns listed in the Bible for different aspects of faithfulness and follow-through for people today who are living out their faith. Expect a greater reward. God's reward gives us the motivation to move forward. John 10:10, "The thief comes only to steal, kill, and destroy. I come that they may have life and that they may have it to the full." So on our definition there, so what is a real man when cut from a biblical mold? The real man is one who rejects passivity. Rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects the greater reward, God's reward. Here's my challenge to you. We're going to be talking about this definition and how it plays out in marriage, raising sons, daughters, work, man's journey, sexuality. We're going to be talking about a lot of those things over the next couple of weeks. How does that work out practically in these areas? But I want you to begin to memorize that, and I want you to begin to wrestle with that. Am I a man who rejects passivity? Am I a man who's accepting responsibility? Am I a man who's leading courageously? Am I a man who's actually looking forward and expecting God's greater reward? Now, I want to leave 2 images in your mind. 2 dads and 2 sons. The first image is Adam walking into a plowed field and kneeling in the soil and picking up and holding in his arms the body of his youngest son. As he looks into that glazed look of death in the eyes of Abel, and as he looks on the ground and sees his brains and his blood spilling on the ground, knowing that Abel died at the hands of his oldest son, Cain, who bashed his head in out of anger and hatred. And Adam's looking into the eyes of his son and thinking to himself, "This is my fault. I disobeyed God, and I put in place death." Is that the man, the manhood, the legacy that you want to leave? Second, dad and son. Youth pastor in Little Rock, Arkansas, it takes a group of students to get a Coke and trying to figure out what to ask these boys. He finally comes up with this, and he says to the boys, "Did any of you guys know what a real man is? How would you define what a real man is?" And Robert Lewis's son, Robert Lewis developed this study. Robert Lewis's son, Garrett, said, "Oh, I know what a real man is. A real man is one who rejects passivity, accepts responsibility, leads courageously, and expects the greater reward, God's reward." And the youth pastor, with his mouth dropping open, dumbfounded to hear a young boy articulate a clear understanding of what it means to be a man, says to the boy, "Where did you learn that?" And Garrett Lewis looked him in the eye and said, "I learned it from my dad. I learned it from my dad." The masculinity that breathes life into the next generation. Which of those 2 models do you want to follow? Nate?